Hello, Traci and Rodney Wright. Welcome to the Sisterhood. Rodney, you for a second time.
Yes, I'm a reoccurring brother on the Sisterhood podcast.
I love
Honored to
it.
be here.
Yeah,
Oh, I
thanks
just
for
love
having
it.
us.
Honor. It's an honor.
And it's just so, I just feel like this is perfect timing. And, I've known both of you for a long time and have walked some life with you, and which has been just such a gift to me because you're both such incredible people. And I have been able to watch as your journey has unfolded. And then you wrote a book together, how to talk to your kids about sex. And you are on this journey of really traveling around the country and maybe the world. I actually don't know if you've been internationally speaking yet, but and just really helping families to navigate this world of sexuality. So, how did you both end up in the middle of this conversation?
Well, that's a great question, Krista. First of all, it's an honor to be with you. So thank you guys so much for just giving opportunity for us to share our voice and hopefully help so many people. For me, it just started out being raised in a home where my mom and dad were pastors and had a deep faith in God. But really, as I was growing up, we didn't know how to talk about sexuality in a healthy way. And so there wasn't a lot of education about how to navigate that. Now I'm 53, so we didn't have the internet when I was a kid. So, when I was exposed to pornography, I say jokingly, it was chiseled on a rock, by a caveman. That's how old I am. So, and thank God I didn't have just the inundated screens in front of me all the time, but it was a real difficult thing to navigate. And then just going through puberty as a young man, we didn't get a lot of ways to process and think and talk about masturbation. So when pornography connected with masturbation, it just became that explosion of dopamine in the brain. And other than just do what my religion said, which repent, promise God you'll never do it again, confess. I mean, I was kind of doing all those things. So it wasn't like a big secret. It was just people I felt safe, my brother, ultimately my dad. So my journey just started that after I got married, I thought before marriage, if I get married, it'll solve this problem and it'll go away. And what I didn't realize at the time in my early 20s was that marriage doesn't change us. It just reveals more of what it finds in us. So if it finds health and we're managing our lives in a healthy way, it just reveals that. And if it finds unhealth, then it just reveals that as well. And I didn't really understand how sexuality affects the brain and the neuroscience that we've learned now about the brain. And with ADD and ADHD, just being more susceptible to those things that are big hits of dopamine. So for me, it was just like a real cocktail of challenge and confusion that really led me to a sexual trauma assessment treatment therapist in my mid-20s because I just wasn't transforming. So for me, it wasn't about getting caught or a big secret. It was just about this is not changing in my life and I'm going to go get help because my my faith didn't have a good framework to know how to talk about it or help us move forward in it. So for me, when I went to the therapist and I learned about Out of the Shadows with Patrick Carnes, and I learned about retraining the brain, which is the biblical word is repentance, neuroplasticity. Repentance is metanoia, change your mind. And so you realize that scripture is giving you help, but just a different way to look at it to help us move forward. So that began a part of our healing journey for me. And that was 24 years ago. And so we found Pure Desire about 8 years ago and brought them to our congregation in Idaho. And I really love this organization because they were integrating the neuroscience of the brain and the clinical studies with the biblical truth. And so it wasn't one versus the other, it was both and. And so it was then I felt the prompting to jump on board. And of course, I love that we help men and women find healing. But for me, writing this book with Traci, How to Talk with Your Kids About Sex, now we can become proactive to help our grandkids. Now we're fighting for our grandkids, right? and helping the young parents be trained and educated about how to communicate to their kids. So that's a little piece of a long story that brought us around to this point, and we just want to be proactive educators in this regard.
And so obviously, our journey as a couple in our 20s was to go into recovery together and to heal together. And so that's been for the last, almost 25 years. We've walked through what that looks like to heal as a couple. We were parents of young children. Okay, so now how do we help them? And Rodney really had a heart, part of it in our church was knowing this wasn't talked about a lot in faith communities. And so he started teaching parents because he knew that was a great way to get your dads or your moms in that might have struggled, that might still have unhealed places in their lives, to bring them in and talk to them about your kids, because who doesn't want to help your kids, right? And sometimes we think, oh, I've made these mistakes, so too late for me, but I want to help my kids now. And that's especially why he starts his idea to start the book out with pursuing your own personal health, because really we don't want to skip over our own health and just say, okay, well, I'm going to just kind of go through this blindly with my kids, but to be able to look back and heal from the things in our own lives and move forward. And so that was really Rodney's heart. And then I think the other piece that I saw in him was, if I could go back and help young Rodney or young Traci or someone else, we'd rather get on the front end of helping our teenagers and our young kids to learn about healthy sexuality than wait until that problem became a pattern, right? Because all of our kids are going to go through things that are a problem, but if we are there to walk with them, we can help them better not allow it to become a pattern. So that's a couple of reasons why I think it led us to write this book, to make this one of the main focuses of what we share with others.
And I would suspect that it's true for some of our listeners that they pushed play because they want to help their kids, but they already know there's something I need to deal with myself, or my spouse needs to deal with, or I need to approach him or her about. And so I want to encourage listeners, if that is you, then you're just in the right spot.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you don't love yourself well, you're not going to know how to love your children or your spouse well. So, you're worthy of love. I would just say to the man or woman who says, well, I've got so much negative sexual history, I just hope it goes away and I'm not going to focus on it. It doesn't just go away. And so this is where, whether it's your own actions of addiction or behavior, or you've been hurt by someone's sexual behavior, working through your trauma, coming to terms with your negative history is really one of the best gifts that you give yourself, because then you can live with no shame. And I love the quote by Brene Brown, so I'm a big fan of hers. If you deny your story, it traps you, but if you own it, you can write a brave new ending. And so there's something just about taking a look at your history, owning it at whatever level, healing from the shame of it. And to me, this is what I see in Jesus. This is what I see Christ doing on earth, is helping men and women heal their shame and seeing their worth and value, and learning and moving forward and not being ensnared or trapped by that history. So whether that means join a group of Pure Desire, seek a therapist in your community, you are so worthy of getting help.
Yeah. And so just quickly, what would you say are the resources out there for people to heal their own pain in this area?
Well, we're big advocates of the nonprofit that we joined, puredesire.org. It was started over 20 years ago by Dr. Ted and Diane Roberts, and they have CSATs and PSAP. So a CSAT is a certified sexual addiction therapist, and you can look those up in your community as well. But they're trained by Dr. Patrick Carnes' organization, ITAP. And so they specifically deal with the trauma and the brain and the retraining of the brain. And they're an excellent resource, I think, for people. Also, Pure Desire has groups for men and women, women who are betrayed, women who struggle with love, sex, and relationship addiction, called Unraveled, and then 7 Pillars for Men. So, typically we're hurt in relationships and we heal in relationships. So getting in good, safe communities and getting around good, safe people who are educated, not just compassionate, but educated, and know how to give you a pathway forward, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Tracy. Did you have something to add?
I was just going to say the downside to technology is obviously additional exposure to things we don't want for ourselves or our children. And the upside to technology is additional information to heal and to grow and to learn about what's going on. And hopefully that lowers the shame of like, yeah, we're all struggling or we're all exposed in some way or another to this world, this culture. And so I think the upside to that is there are a lot of resources out there right now if people want to heal. And so if we can lower our shame and let go of secrets, we then are a model for a way forward for our kids to not have to keep secrets.
Yeah. And what I found in my faith community is a lot of wonderful, compassionate people who were empathetic and caring, but they just weren't competent in knowing how to help me move forward. And so this is where not just finding someone compassionate, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I'm grateful for compassion, but not all local pastors have a competency to understand trauma and addiction and how they affect one another. So just finding a great, skilled, compassionate, and competent man or woman or group can be real beneficial.
And I would say the same thing as a parent. I was kind of one of those parents that was like, well, you know, my parents taught me and I followed the rules, and, you know, so my kids, I'm going to just teach them what's right and wrong and they're going to follow the rules. You know, it was really simple in my mind, and it's a little more complicated than that usually, especially in our culture now. And so walking through Rodney's story with him and knowing his faith and how strong it was, his family background, that helped me to understand and to grow myself and know that I could have used some hand holding when my kids were younger. I wish that I would have had some hand holding. And part of that, us writing that book, is learning more in our whole growth process, right? Our kids were already there when we were working through our own journey. And now we want to help them and walk the journey with them. And even as young adults, we're still walking that journey with them. So just that understanding that we want to take that resources and push that forward for our kids.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in a little bit to your book because I do think it's so helpful. But first, I want to ask this question. Experts are saying that pornography is the biggest educator, sex education that our kids are getting these days. And can you just, I think we all know that's not healthy, but can you help us name why that's a problem?
Yeah, I think just because of early exposure, that the age of kids becoming exposed because of technology, right? It's the pros and cons of technology. They're getting exposed at a much younger age. And there's a great website that we refer to in the book called Culture Reframe, where Gail Dines really is an expert. And she's really fighting that pornography is a public health issue, not just a moral issue. And I really love her voice, because the pornography today is much more degrading and shame-based. It's demanding and it's not about obligation. I mean, it is about obligation. It's about victimizing and exploits women and men. And it just lacks emotional attachment. And so it's all the things that really aren't what healthy sexuality is about. It's not about bonding and not about mutuality and about respect. And so it really is just about, I'm trying to think of the language here.
Well, it's
help me with it.
My thought is just it's free, it's accessible, it's more violent. So we're really inundated in what a lot of experts would call pornified culture. So even if we have parameters set up for our kids, they're inundated with it in one way or another. Even if we homeschool our kids or we're very strict and particular about what they watch, it just is the culture that we live in. And so our kids, whether they're in faith communities, youth groups, they're still affected by it. And it's hard for them to make sense of it because, of course, as a teenager, you have a lot going on and, that puberty and all of that. And a lot of that are just the natural experiences or temptations or desires that God has put in us. And then now I'm inundated with this and I don't know what to do with it. So that's where being able to have your parents, especially parents are the number one educator. They should be the number one educator, but we know not everyone has a healthy parent. And so we can be that for other people's children. We can be that in our faith communities or even in our schools. There's often that opportunity to link arms. And what Rodney was talking about, Gail Dines, we went to a conference that she was at, and it was, just people of faith, or all different faith backgrounds. And what we realized was they were linking arms and saying, this is wrong. This isn't what we want for our kids. So regardless of where we stand, and that sometimes speaks loudly in our culture because they can make it into a religious issue when it really isn't. And so to be able to say, no, this is really about, we want our young people to learn to be intimate, healthy adults with great relationships. And there's a lot of people on the same wavelength with that. And that's where kind of bonding together to help our schools, to help our culture, we make a bigger presence by being able to do that.
Yeah. And they say the violence is much more prevalent in pornography these days. And so it degrades rather than lifts up the values of others. And sometimes they would say there's a word I can't find in my brain and I'm a little frustrated, sorry, but how it devalues is that it actually becomes traumatic when kids watch pornography. It's more of trauma than just exposure to nudity now because of the violence connected to pornography. So I think there really is issue for concern because just a couple clicks away and a kid can see just all kinds of degrading images at whatever level. And, so again, just the exposure is greater than ever before for access for our kids.
I think it's interesting because, as you said, Traci, often we're known, well, you didn't say this, but I'll take that next step, as Christians, as being kind of puritanical, and that we think sex is bad is what maybe the general culture would put those words in our mouth, because maybe in churches, people have heard that we shouldn't talk about it, that it's shameful in general. Right. And so by bringing it to light, one, we say, this is on the table. This is something we talk about because it's something that matters to us, and we matter to God, and this matters to God. But also, I think this idea of finding common ground with people outside of the church, because it has crossed a line. It's no longer just a moral issue. As you said, it's a public health issue, but it's an issue of child development, really. And so that is a common ground, that is an opportunity for Christians to not just enter this conversation about pornography, but to enter the conversation about what is sex for with a larger group of people. That makes me excited. I mean, it's God using something intended for evil for good, potentially, but we have to be the people willing to step into those conversations. And that's where we all go, maybe that's great for Traci and Rodney, but not so great for Alex. So I'm excited, but I can imagine that some of our listeners are thinking, how would I ever enter into this larger conversation in my own community?
And who trains us, and how do we get equipped to have that conversation? That's a part of what's in my heart. Wouldn't it be great if every church said, hey, before you come on Sunday morning, we want all you young parents to go through a 5-week course or 4-week course on how to talk with your kids about sex. Because Sunday morning isn't always the right setting to have that dialogue in a large group of people, but we need to become more educators and say, there are resources out there, and it's important to us that we learn how to be holistic in our faith and learn how to integrate healthy sexuality with our faith. And so this is why we think our book can be a real asset and a gift to a church, because they can do it in a small group. They can do it in a class format. There's questions at the end of each chapter. How did you learn? So there's senses of we can learn as a community of adults to help our kids. Because Traci and Rodney don't have all the answers, right? It's collective wisdom, and say, hey, what seems to be the best on this? Here's a couple thoughts, and we're wrestling with it. Then it gives the parents some language and a framework, or some kind of a scaffolding to start having that conversation with their kids. And that takes out the scariness of it. Like, I've heard couples say, we just want Rodney and Traci to talk to our kids. And I'm thinking, hey, our kids said to me, Dad, I wish you would have had this book when you were raising us, and I said, I know, I wish I would have too. It would have been really, really helpful. So we're just trying to offer our voice to give parents a framework so that they can begin to build something pretty unique and special for their family of origin and generations to come.
And we understand that it's an awkward topic for a lot of parents. It really is. It's hard to know how and when. And we often don't want to start too early because we think then we're exposing them to something they shouldn't. And so sometimes we wait till too late. And I like to say that, when our kids are younger, they're like a little sponge. They think that we know all the answers and they're listening. And as they get more towards puberty and teenage, they listen a lot more to their peers and they begin to listen less to us. It's not that they're not listening, but their focus is more peer oriented. So those early stages, which is when they say kids are being exposed to pornography and often then masturbation in middle school age group, that's a time really for us to start the conversation ahead of time, even if it's small conversations. Those are a lot better than the one time at puberty conversation. So having a lot of conversations, and that takes being intentional and first starting with our own health and our own understanding and being comfortable with the words and saying our body parts would be a good start, without feeling uncomfortable.
And not
just say it to your spouse. Okay, we're going to go practice.
That's one of our chapters, practice communication. Because if you think penis or vagina are evil words, then, my goodness, don't say them because Dad, take a breath, Dad. How come your face is turning red? The kids get that my dad's very uncomfortable about this topic or mom's uncomfortable. So the younger you can start, we say not the one conversation for 100 minutes when they're 13, but 100 1-minute conversations all through their life and development, starting with their body is good, they're made in God's image, male and female. And so letting your kids see nudity or anatomy while they're on your lap, just looking at a kid's book. And you can see this is how God made daddy and your brother, and this is how God made you and mommy, so that they don't connect shame with their physical body. There's no parts of your physical body that's innately evil. You're good. You're made in God's image. And I think that's a piece that has to be part of the framework, that they realize from the beginning what's good about how God made them. And they don't connect shame to their sense of sexuality or arousal, but they learn how to realize that some of this is a normal part of my development. And I learn how to manage it, just like I manage my food, I manage my time, I manage my money, and home becomes now a safe place where we talk about how we manage those things,
And we talk about age-appropriate conversations in the book, as well as online. There are a lot of resources to help you. That's one of our biggest recommendations is just start with naming body parts and not having shame around naming our body parts and getting a book that helps do that, or where babies come from or all of that. Start really simple. And then you're kind of opening up that so they feel safe about talking about those things, instead of my parents completely avoid anything that has to do with my body, with my growing, with puberty. And so we're actually starting the conversation with our kids and then talking about boundaries and safe people, and all of that is just, you can take that progression, and there's a lot of different resources that'll help what that looks like. And then you can have that conversation around puberty, but hopefully that's not your only conversation that you've had, is the one-time unload of the birds and the bees, but you're actually having those conversations along the way. And then puberty comes, and then as they get older, it's great to incorporate it into the everyday type things that we're doing. Like maybe we're watching a movie together or watching the news, and stuff is always coming up there, and we start having conversations around that. Or maybe we're walking the dog, or we're making a snack after school or whatever, and we're able to introduce or ask questions. And maybe after watching this podcast, you say, hey, I watched a podcast that was talking about teens and how parents and teens can communicate. And so you use that as just a short, and you don't have to unload all the information all at once, but just kind of have a short conversation with them and keep opening that door. Keeping the door open for them is really important.
So let's dive in to a few chapters of your book because I do want us to kind of get specific. And so
Yeah.
I feel like we already talked about, really getting healthy in your own life and healing from your own possible trauma. I feel like we talked about, making it a regular part of your conversations as kids grow up. What else would you say would be really important to talk about today?
Well, we have 10 chapters in our book. And so we think that they're going to give you some good framework. And a couple of those, Krista, you already mentioned. But I think one of them that it's funny because it's seeing sexuality from a different light. But our greatest need is to foster connection with our kids, emotional connection. This is the one of the most beautiful parts of sexuality is when you learn how to be intimate, and now you've navigated your intimacy and sexuality with your partner, your spouse. And so that learning how to be intimate, but you can be intimate without being sexual. And this is where our culture gets so confused with our kids. We all need intimate relationships, but not all relationships have to be sexual to be intimate. And so that's part of culture's confusion. Like, they say, say hi and then have sex and then say, oh, by the way, what was your name? I mean, it's so confusing and backwards. So helping your kids, we're all made for intimate relationships, in my opinion, because we're made in God's image, Father, Son, and Spirit, to know and be known. And so the more in your home, it's okay. It's safe to be known. It's safe to say, I spilled the milk at the table, or I made a mistake, or I need help in this area. So the culture that you're building in your home, where we want to be connected with you. And one of the things that builds connection with our children more than anything is vulnerability, appropriate vulnerability, right? So I think about growing up as a kid. My dad is a cross between Billy Graham, Ronald Reagan, and 10% John Wayne. That's my dad. I didn't think that guy ever made a mistake, right? And in his culture, he's 92 today, be 93 in a month or so. He's one of my best friends. But in his culture, you weren't vulnerable. That was not seen as an asset at all. But what I found with my children is our vulnerability in any area of our life, it actually is attractive and it creates a connection. Oh, my dad's human too. And we struggle together, maybe different areas or different things, but fostering connection and then learning how to love and bond to something in a healthy context is really, really crucial, because ultimately we want to grow to have a loving, not just sexual bond, but you want to learn how to have a healthy emotional bond with your partner. This is so crucial in healthy relationships. So that connection piece, building a framework of that in your home where it's safe to be known and to know others, and fostering that connection is so crucial. We talk about that in one whole chapter.
Yeah, and just being intentional. So of course, that's what you guys talk a lot about on the podcast. I know that's your guys' heart too, as being intentional people and intentional parents, of course. So that's a piece of that, and that bleeds over into every area, but it definitely bleeds over into that area of their sexuality, and they're growing and learning about what it is, what they want for their future and what kind of relationships they want to have. So I think all of the other pieces and chapters in the book that you can talk about there, it's that intentionality of helping them have real deep connections and deep relationships, and then opening up the conversation further, which could go a lot of different ways depending on the parent. So yeah, we believe in that, and we continue to grow in that. We didn't get it all right, and our book has lots of stories about how we didn't get it all right, and we can continue to learn. And that is, I think, a family kind of motto is we all keep growing. We're all on a growing journey. Mom and dad continue to keep growing, and we have family support to help each other when we get stuck and we need to keep growing. So
right. And this is where trauma plays a piece in that, because in our trauma, if we can't share it, talk about it, process it, then we bury our trauma. And many times addictive, compulsive behavior is just about trying to medicate the traumas inside. But in a healthy home, if we have a scary or traumatic experience and we can process that, then we're actually learning how to do something that's much more healthy and intimate, because we're learning how to share feelings. Facts stay at one level, but feelings take us to a much more. I was afraid. I was so afraid and scared. And I'm trying to think of a word that I can't find. I want to say petrified, but that's not the right word.
Paralyzed.
Paralyzed. Yeah. My brain is still waking up. I was paralyzed by something. I didn't know what to do, Dad. That's so good when kids can share those emotions. That's how we learn to have that intimacy, how things make us feel. I'm angry, I'm upset. Those are all, emotions aren't good or bad. They just are. They're comfortable and uncomfortable, but they're all welcome.
One of the other piece. Oh yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I have a question for parents who are working at that, building that intimacy, that trust, and their kids come to them with opinions about sex and sexuality that are different than the parents. How do you maintain that open, honest, vulnerable tone as a parent when what you're hearing from your child is something you really don't like and you're trying to redirect? Is that appropriate to try to redirect? And at what age is it not appropriate any longer to say they're human and they have free will and they're going to come to different conclusions about sex and sexuality than I have?
Yeah. That actually happens for a lot of parents.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I can
because
imagine.
as they, and they're exploring what their culture says and their peers say, and why do we believe something different? And
what makes it the better way? Why would scriptures teach us the better way on something? And I think you have to give them a better answer than because God said, or because the Bible, well, why? What's the moral reason? What's the philosophical reason why a committed monogamous relationship with a husband and wife is better? Why is that better, Dad? And so being able to educate yourself about the better way and why it's the better way, I think is really important. And not just, and I don't mean that to try to convert someone with your conversation, but just so that you're intelligent in the conversation, in that context. You're not just giving, well, my religion says so this is why, but why is committed love better than uncommitted love? What makes the difference in that? And in one of the chapters, it's the last chapter, we talk about never turning away from our kids when our kids go down a different value path than we would. And scripture gives us examples of this, like in the story of the prodigal son, right? He went down a different path, even included sexual choices, the scripture tells us, right? And so the father still loved the son, even though the son was on a different pathway. And so I think this is an important piece to realize, that even though our kids make different moral choices than we would affirm, we can disagree with choices, but we don't have to somehow stop loving our kids. And I think that's part of the rub sometimes within religion, is that we can share different values, but we don't have to stop being loving and caring for our kids. And I wish that was neat and clean and easy to do, but it's not always neat, clean, and easy. But I'm grateful scripture gives us some patterns of what that might look like.
And we've heard a lot of examples from parents, even recently. A lot of them will have to do with the gender and identity situations. And we've heard different parents that don't know how to handle that. And we've heard other parents that have done that really well, that have stated, this is what I feel, and you're my child, and I named you. You were born to me, and I named you, and you will always be this person to me, and I will always love you. And I hope that your choice will not bring any division in our relationship, because I want to still maintain and have a close relationship with you. That's a very difficult conversation for a parent to have sometimes, especially when we have very strong values that we're standing on, and we feel like maybe we tried to teach them those values and they make a different choice. And kind of like what you were saying, Alex, it's hard to know when that time is, because we go from a child, our kids don't always know that, okay, in my mind, you went from a child where I made every decision for you and told you everything that was right or wrong. And there is a transition time that happens gradually as they're growing up. And sometimes happens a little too early, where they feel the need to make their own decisions. And then there's that tension with parent and child. And it isn't an easy decision or easy to navigate that always, depending on our kids. And on, you know, their opinions and how strong-willed they are in making that. But that's why that foundation of you being a healthy person, growing, even modeling for them. I don't have it all figured out, but I continue to grow, and I ask questions around things too that I don't understand. I think that that's helped me as a parent, and maybe my kids, just to say, I don't have it all figured out. I continue to ask questions and to help myself, to help others, or just to ask God, how can I see this from a different perspective? Then you're modeling that for them, that we aren't a know-it-all that has it all figured out. I think that can go a long way for them to learn that, right? Because they may think something now that they don't think later, or they will learn along the way too as they make choices.
Love and humility go a long way.
Yeah, always, right?
Yeah.
Always.
And
humility.
Yeah, to love is to have someone's best interest. And sometimes it's knowing how to speak the truth in love. Because I love you, I say these things, but I'm doing it with having your best interest, but I stay in the game and I keep loving you. You know.
Yeah. And I think about, really, that's part of what I do in my life coaching is you're drawing just someone out in their process by just asking powerful questions to them.
Yes.
And letting them grapple. Because if we're doing the grappling for them, it actually makes them dig in their heels about something, because we're actually putting our own grappling on them, as opposed to asking really honest and sincere questions, not in a way that is attacking or aggressive, but more just honest and sincere and curious, and then letting them do the grappling, because that's where transformation is going to happen, is in their process, right?
The one that's talking is typically the one that's learning, right? They're having to think through. That's a great question, mom or dad, and they're having to think through that. Yeah, for sure.
That's good. Can you give us just a hopeful story from, you've traveled so far and wide, but I would even love to hear a hopeful story of a family who's been navigating some hard sexual dynamics in their home and they've had some success with it.
Well, I think about a friend of mine named Drew, who is a young married man and has a little daughter now, and years ago just came to terms with his own journey and sought help in his own journey. And, now is starting a young family where him and his wife are just being real proactive and helping their children have a healthy framework. We have so many stories within the groups of men and women who come through Pure Desire. Probably over close to 12,000 men and women that have been through our groups, who are owning their story, not living with shame, and now paying it forward and helping the next generation. But I think the real fruit maybe will come 20 years from now, when that young little boy or little girl gets raised in a home with just some healthier context and has a real healthier framework when they show up and have to navigate the culture that they live in. And maybe we'll be thankful that their faith community, didn't cast a negative light on sexuality, but actually embraced the conversation in a much healthier way. And now they're navigating it in a much healthier way,
Yeah.
I think I witness a lot of young parents doing a better job, maybe, if that's how I would put it, but just more open and ready to share, and kind of they're a little bit ahead, I think, in the conversation. It's probably partly from that exposure that they've had, so they're not as shying away as much from it, getting resources, helping their kids. We had one couple in a parenting group, and they'd gone through addiction and betrayal in their own marriage, and then they were wanting to learn how to help their kids. And as they began to have conversations, their little boy came to them, saw something on YouTube, and it wasn't necessarily pornography or sexual in nature, but he felt uncomfortable with it. And they had started the conversation of having those open conversation when you feel uncomfortable, coming to mom and dad. And they were just so excited that he was coming to them and saying that, and they felt like then they had the tools. So now when the bigger questions come as we go along, we're going to be able to talk to our kids. And part of that was letting go of their own shame and getting some of their own healing, and then having the words to share with others. So we hear those stories a lot. And I mean, that's a specific one, but we hear a lot of it comes from not having secrets anymore and lowering shame and being able to have real, truthful conversations. And I have a lot of hope for our young parents that are coming up right now. I think that they want to do this differently, and they understand what's going to hit their kids. You know, some of us that transitioned from the internet, not having it to having it, didn't really know what was going to hit us. And we think it's like what we were dealing with, even though that had its own issues. But I think the younger parent is knowing, okay, this is a completely different situation, and I'm going to have to lean into what's uncomfortable if I'm going to help my kids.
Yeah, their eyes wide open. Whereas we were more in reaction mode of like, whoa, where did this come from? And whoa, you know, and then, but they're going in like, hey, we know exactly what's going on and we want to equip differently.
Yeah. And that's such a good thing, because part of doing a good job is being shock proof. And one of the websites we shared, Culture Reframed, a really good organization. But they give you kind of like how a parent can handle. Compose is like an acronym for how a parent can handle when a child views pornography, rather than we freak out, we yell at them, we ground them. You know, it's putting the blame back on the pornography industry and saying your kid is naturally going to be exposed to this and view this, and they are made to go wow and to be attracted to it. So don't be mad at your kid, be mad at the pornography industry, help your kid. And in our book, we talk about training and guiding, not shaming and punishing. And that's a big turning, different way of looking at it sometimes for parents from what we were given even, or how we were trained.
And focusing on growth, not perfection. And in the book, we write about a continuum of thought on masturbation, and just really looking at it from a health standpoint, looking at it from a continuum of conservative and liberal, and from not just recovery ministries, but just Christian psychiatrists and psychologists. And so for us, I mean, having a kid that could talk about it, it doesn't become, it's just something they're learning about their body. It becomes a part of their growing through adolescence, but doesn't become a compulsive, addictive behavior. So now you just learn and grow through something, and seeing it more as maybe immaturity to maturity, as in always black and white. And I think just we like everything to be black and white, right or wrong, instead of a continuum of growth, just like in anything else. And so that's a subject that we really try to deal with in the book. And in fact, one of my friends who read it, or someone that I met, said, thank you for not just giving 2 paragraphs, but thank you for giving like 9 pages to this subject matter and helping us grapple with it. So you might want to start with saying to your kid, how did you navigate masturbation, mom and dad? Was it helpful or not helpful? So again, this is just where taking away some taboos, being willing to have these kind of conversations. What do you actually believe about that? You know, is all nerve endings in your body evil? You know, what are some of your thoughts on this? So just helping you maybe just really educate yourself and be a student. Then it's more about helping that kid move toward health. I think healthy is the new holy. Healthy. We want them to be in right relationship with themselves, with other people. And ultimately, when I'm in good relationship with Rodney and others, I'm in good relationship with God, because I'm loving my neighbor as I love myself, right?
And so good.
We're seeing that science and social science are catching up with what the church has taught for so long. And so this idea of healthy, again, it's a common language that we can use with people outside the church too, or even our young adult children who maybe are turned off by anything that sounds too churchy, to say healthy is a goal that everyone can get behind. And we know, because God made us a certain way, that healthy is holy. And so we can feel confident in that as parents, if there's a disconnect in the spiritual language with our children.
Yeah.
Which there often is. And there very often is, because the language doesn't translate. And I like the language of manage versus mismanage, because I think that's good language as well. You know, and healthy sexuality, unhealthy sexuality. I think it's just better language to help people in this regard.
Yeah, Rodney and I often try to think about, you know, the words that we were given growing up in a more conservative Christian faith. and then the words that our kids are coming to us with, and the disconnect, just like you talked about. And so we've tried to grab words that are more helpful to them, that create an understanding or a connection. One for me was just the word for sin, of using the word unbeing. So we've talked about sin being missing the mark, right? So missing the mark is just unbeing. I'm missing on that God design that's inside of me, the way God created me to be and to act and to love others. And so that to me gives me a little more language to be able to correct without just being like, I sinned. Oh no, is God away from me? Am I away from God? And it helps me to understand that no, all the time I'm redirecting when I miss the mark, and I can go back and correct that from unbeing. And so being is just, I'm created in the image of God. And when I'm walking out in the way God designed me to be, I think that translates into every area of our life. And all three of my kids, I think at all stages, wanted to be walking out of their true self. They may have gotten off in a direction or not, but that, I feel like that wording, and in other cases, sometimes a different wording can help them understand, yeah, we're actually on the same team. Mom and dad and kids are on the same team. We want the same thing. It just sometimes the way that we communicate, we miss it because we're a different generation, or we're, or we've been taught a certain way that wasn't that helpful.
And I know with my therapist, I spent 3 years, just most of it navigating my core beliefs about God, self, and others. And I didn't believe that God had anything, but, I didn't believe God had my best interest. And I thought my sin was what disappointed God, or that God turned from me, or that, and the reality is that sin doesn't punish God, it punishes us. The wages of sin are what sin gives us. God has nothing but our best interests. God's only trying to help and heal. And the judgment of God is redemptive. It's not punitive. Sin is what's punitive, right? Just make a bunch of mistakes in your life and you'll feel the punitiveness of that. But if you can just see that, oh, God's actually trying to help me, that Jesus came to show us the better way. He came to show us how to be human and how to live healthy lives and manage our lives that bring worth and value to ourselves and others. To me, some of those paradigms, I like to say that sometimes it's good to get kicked in the paradigm. It's good to get just a little adjustment, even in our faith. Sometimes if it gets distorted, we don't have a clear view. And to me, God is exactly like Jesus. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So being very Christ-centric about the teachings of Jesus and about Jesus showing us the better way.
That's a really helpful distinction, Rodney. I really like that sin is punitive to us, but that God is always redemptive. And so that's really, I think, a helpful distinction, and really can help us in our language as we parent. So
Right. Because I always thought when Jesus was on the cross and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? I heard as a kid, every time we sin, God turns away. Well, man, God was looking away from me way more than God was looking for me in my teen years, I feel like. But then when you understand that, Jesus wasn't praying on the cross, it was a prophecy, Psalm 22. And it starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me? But if you read the whole Psalm, it says, but you, O God, will not neglect the neglected, nor will you turn your face from me. But when I cry, you will hear. And Paul says God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself. So the beauty of that is that God never does abandon us. God can do a lot of things, but God can't abandon. That's the love of God. And so to me, this is the overwhelming pursuit of a God that loves us and has nothing but our best interest. And regardless of how far we go down a wrong path, we may turn, but God never will. And I think that's the hopeful message of the Christian faith, is the pursuit and love of God. So I just want to say that to the parent who they're just listening and saying, I wish I would have had a book. I wish I could do a lot of things over, and your kid's down a different path. Listen, God's down that path with them, and God's right behind them, pursuing them. And I'll pray with you that God will send people and resources to help, and that you and I get to be the answer to some parent's prayer too, when we meet somebody on our journey.
What a great hopeful message to end on today. I just feel like there's a lot of parents that need to hear that. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for the work that you're doing. It is so important. And I can't think of a more timely just era that you could be stepping into and being a voice in this conversation. I'm so thankful you both are right in the middle of it. I mean, truly, I am so grateful that you are dead center.
Well, if we can help any faith community or any parent, or if you can get our resource and start a parent group, whatever we can do to help. I mean, I'm sure you'll put our information on the podcast where they can get the book and resource, but there's a lot of good resources out there. So,
Well, thanks,
We wanna
Rodney
help
and
the
Traci.
next generation, right?
That's right. All right. Have a great day, you two, and we'll be in touch
Yeah.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye.